The entire world had been swallowed by the blizzard, transformed into an endless canvas of stark white, painted by the furious strokes of a raging snowstorm. Snow, fine as dust, whipped across the vast treeless prairie, obscuring the horizon, blurring sky and earth into a single swirling vortex. The wind howled, a mournful, relentless sound that seemed to carry the very cold itself. Biting deep into the bones. In the heart of this desolate expanse stood a small, sturdy log cabin. Smoke, a thin, defiant plume, rose from its stone chimney, quickly torn apart by the gale. Inside, Clara Bell, 30s, a woman worn by life but imbued with a fierce resilience. Her eyes, having witnessed too much sorrow, yet still holding a quiet spark of strength, moved with practiced efficiency. Her hands, calloused from years of frontier life, kneaded dough on a rough-hewn table. The cabin was small, warm, and filled with the scent of wood smoke and baking bread. A single lantern cast a soft, flickering glow. Clara paused, listening. The wind was a constant companion, but today it felt different, more insistent. A shiver, not of cold, ran down her spine. She glanced at a framed, faded photograph on a shelf. Thomas, her late husband, a kind smile frozen in time. He had died 2 winters ago, a hunting accident. Since then, the profound silence of the prairie had been her only company. She pulled a heavy wool shawl tighter around her shoulders. The woodpile was dwindling, a necessary evil venturing out. The cold out here was a living thing. It gnawed at the bones, whispered promises of oblivion. But Thomas had taught me to fight it, to outlast it. He'd taught me everything, except how to be alone. She bundled herself in a thick coat, hat, and mittens. The door groaned open, revealing a blinding white wall. She stepped out, leaning into the wind, her head bowed. Each breath was a sharp sting in her lungs. She trudged to the small, covered woodpile, her movements slow and deliberate. The snow was already knee-deep. Her eyes scanned the familiar landscape, a habit born of necessity and caution. Nothing but pristine white, but then, a flicker. A dark shape near the sparse tree line, a cluster of skeletal cottonwoods 100 yards off. It was too large for a rabbit, too still for a deer. Curiosity, a dangerous thing in this land, tugged at her. She hesitated, her breath pluming into the frigid air. The wind screamed, trying to dissuade her. But something compelled her forward. Perhaps it was just a broken branch, she told herself. Or a shadow playing tricks. She pushed through the deepening snow, each step a monumental effort. The shape resolved itself. It was a bundle, small and still, partially buried in a drift, nestled against the gnarled roots of an old tree. As she neared, a faint sound pierced the wind's roar. A whimper. So small, so fragile, it could have been the wind itself. Clara froze. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She knew that sound. She dropped to her knees, heedless of the biting cold. With trembling hands, she brushed away the snow. Beneath a tattered, blood-stained buffalo hide, a tiny face emerged. Dark eyes, wide with terror and cold, stared up at her. A Comanche infant, barely a few months old. Its skin was blue-tinged, its lips chapped and cracked. A small, intricately beaded cradleboard lay half-buried beside it. Empty. Clara stared, disbelief warring with a primal shock. Abandoned, left for dead. The thought was a physical blow. Her mind raced. An ambush? A desperate flight? The baby let out another weak, reedy cry, a sound that cut through the blizzard's fury and straight into Clara's soul. It was a cry for life. The world had gone silent then, despite the storm. Only that sound. A tiny, fragile thread against the vast, indifferent wilderness. It was a choice, stark and immediate. Leave it to the storm, or... She reached out a gloved hand, hesitated, then gently touched the baby's cheek. It was icy cold. Her eyes darted around the empty, swirling landscape. No one, just her. And this child. The blizzard still raged outside, But inside the cabin, a different kind of storm brewed within Clara's heart. She sat by the roaring fireplace, the Comanche infant cradled in her arms. The baby was wrapped in a thick wool blanket, its tiny body still shivering, but the blue tinge was slowly fading from its lips. Clara's face was a mask of conflicting emotions: fear, pity, a strange, overwhelming sense of responsibility. She held a spoon of warm, watered-down milk to the baby's mouth. The infant weakly sucked, then coughed. Clara's brow furrowed with concern. My heart was a battlefield. Thomas's words, the stories from town, the whispers of raids and massacres. They echoed in my mind. Savages, they called them. Heathens. And yet, this was just a baby. A breath of life, barely clinging on. She remembered the fear, the ingrained prejudice that had been a part of her life since childhood. The cautionary tales about red devils were as common as prairie dust. Taking in an Indian child was not just risky. It was an act of defiance against everything she had been taught, everything her community believed. She looked at the baby's face, so innocent, so helpless. Its small hand, no bigger than her thumb, curled around her finger. A jolt of something, akin to tenderness, shot through her. Fear was a cold hand on my throat, but pity was a fire in my belly. It burned away the labels, the warnings. All I saw was a child, abandoned, dying. She recalled the brutal struggle to carry the infant back to the cabin. The blizzard had seemed to conspire against her, the snow deepening. With every step, the wind tearing at her clothes. She had stumbled, fallen, but held the baby close, shielding it with her own body. A desperate primal instinct had taken over. She had stripped the baby of its frozen, blood-stained clothes, wrapped it in warm blankets, and rubbed its tiny limbs to restore circulation. She'd warmed milk, not knowing if it would take it, but knowing she had to try. Now, the baby's breathing was more even, a faint warmth radiating from its small body. It opened its eyes again, dark pools that seemed to hold the ancient wisdom of the plains. Clara reached for a small, intricately beaded necklace that was clutched in the baby's hand when she found it. It was a beautiful piece, clearly of Comanche origin. She held it for a moment, then gently placed it around the baby's neck. There was no one else. No one to ask, no one to judge. Just the wind and the snow and this tiny, fragile life. The decision wasn't really a decision at all. It was simply what had to be done. She rocked the baby gently, humming a low, tuneless lullaby her own mother used to sing. The cabin, once a tomb of silence, now held the soft sounds of a new life. The fear hadn't vanished, but it had receded, replaced by a quiet, fierce determination. Days had passed. The blizzard had broken, leaving behind a world of pristine, glittering snow under a pale winter sky. The cabin, once a place of quiet solitude, now hummed with a different kind of life. The Comanche baby, whom Clara had tentatively named Little Star in her mind, was thriving. Its cries were stronger, its tiny hands reached out, its dark eyes followed Clara's movements with an almost unnerving intelligence. Clara sat by the fire, rocking Little Star. The baby was wrapped in a soft, clean cloth, its hair a dark, downy fuzz against Clara's arm. Clara's touch was gentle, confident. She'd learned to change its cloths, to soothe its cries, to recognize the subtle signs of hunger or discomfort. Each day was a revelation. A tiny hand gripping my finger, a soft sigh as it slept against my chest. It wasn't just a baby I was caring for. It was a small, insistent beat of life in a world that had felt so still, so empty, since Thomas left. She looked around the cabin. Thomas's hunting rifle still hung above the mantel. His worn chair sat by the window. Memories of him were everywhere. Thomas, he was a good man. Strong, kind in his own way. But when it came to the Comanches, his eyes would harden. He'd seen things, he said. Raids. Friends lost. He spoke of them as a force of nature, a threat. Never as people. A flash of memory. Thomas, his jaw set, cleaning his rifle after news of a distant skirmish. His words, sharp and final. They're savages, Clara. Always remember that. Don't trust him, Clara sighed, a soft, weary sound. She looked down at little Star, who gurgled contentedly. How could Thomas have seen this innocent face and still held such hatred? The child was pure, vulnerable, utterly dependent. His hatred was a scar on his soul, and I suppose, had inherited a piece of it, a quiet apprehension that lived deep in my bones. But this child was slowly unpicking that old wound, thread by thread. She remembered the early days, the internal struggle. Every time the baby cried, a voice in her head whispered warnings. Every time she changed its cloth, she felt a flicker of unease. But the baby's helplessness, its simple need, had steadily eroded those walls. She found herself talking to little Star, telling it about the prairie, about the stars, about the quiet beauty of their isolated world. She told it about Thomas too, not the man who hated, but the man who loved her, who built this cabin with his own hands, who taught her to survive. Cabin, once a place of echoing grief, now felt fuller. The scent of baby powder mixed with wood smoke. A small makeshift cradle, fashioned from a wooden crate and lined with soft furs, sat beside her bed. Clara felt a new purpose blooming within her. It wasn't the purpose of a wife or a widow, but something deeper, more fundamental. The purpose of a protector, a nurturer. She hummed again, a different tune this time, a hopeful melody. Little Star's eyes fluttered closed, its breathing soft and even. Clara watched it sleep, a profound tenderness settling over her. The old wounds of prejudice and loss were still there, but a new, fragile bond was beginning to heal them. The prairie was a vast, silent expanse, stretching endlessly under a brilliant, cold blue sky. The snow, deep and unbroken, sparkled like a million diamonds. The air was crisp, still, holding the promise of a deep freeze. Clara was outside, chopping firewood, her movements strong and rhythmic. Little Star was bundled warmly in a carrier on her back, its small head peeking over her shoulder, watching the axe rise and fall. The silence of the prairie was profound, broken only by the sharp crack of wood and the occasional soft gurgle from the baby. She paused, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of a mittened hand. Her gaze swept the horizon, a practiced habit. At first, she saw nothing, just the endless white, then a subtle disturbance. A faint tremor in the air, a distant, almost imperceptible smudge against the stark line where sky meets earth. It could have been a trick of the light, a distant cloud. Clara dismissed it, turning back to her chopping, but a few minutes later she glanced up again. The smudge was larger, more defined. It wasn't a cloud, it was a line. A dark, moving line. Heart gave a sudden, hard lurch. Her grip tightened on the axe handle. My blood ran cold. The prairie had taught me to read its signs, and this was a sign I knew, not of nature, but of man. And in this empty land, men rarely rode in numbers unless they meant business. She squinted, trying to make out details. Horses, many of them, and riders, panic, sharp and immediate, began to prick at her. She pulled Little Star closer, instinctively shielding the baby with her body. The line grew longer, clearer. She could make out individual figures now, dark silhouettes against the snow. They rode with a swift, purposeful stride, a disciplined formation. And then, the realization hit her, a cold, hard knot in her stomach. They were Comanche. She could see the distinctive outlines of their headdresses, the way they sat their horses, and there were so many, not just a few, dozens, 100. The number echoed in my mind, a terrifying drumbeat. 100 warriors. Coming here, for what? There was only one answer, the baby. They knew. Somehow they knew. Her mind raced. There was nowhere to run, no place to hide. The cabin was her only shelter, and it was a flimsy defense against such a force. She looked down at little Star, who was now stirring, sensing her fear. The baby let out a small whimper. Clara's fear was a tangible thing, a cold hand squeezing her throat. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, to hide, to protect herself. But the baby, she could not abandon this child. Not after everything. She dropped the axe, the sound muffled by the snow. She scooped little Star into her arms, holding it tight against her chest. Her eyes were fixed on the approaching riders, who were now close enough for her to hear the faint thud of hooves on snow. A chilling silence fell over the prairie as the riders drew nearer, their approach like a dark wave across the white expanse. Their faces were grim, unreadable. Clara stood her ground, rooted to the spot, a lone figure against the vastness, clutching a child that was not her own, but for whom she would now fight to the death. The ground trembled faintly as the 100 Comanche warriors halted their horses in a wide, silent semicircle around Clara's small cabin. The air crackled with an unbearable tension. The warriors were formidable, their faces painted, their bodies adorned with feathers and furs, their weapons held at rest but ready. Their horses breathed in plumes of white vapor. The only sounds were the snorting of the horses and the faint creak of Leather Dot in the center of the arc, a towering figure on a magnificent warhorse. This was Chief Bear Claw, 60s, weathered face. Eyes that held the weight of generations, a quiet authority that commanded absolute respect. He wore a magnificent war bonnet, its feathers swaying gently in the still air. His gaze, sharp and unwavering, was fixed on Clara. Clara stood before her cabin door, clutching little Star tightly. The baby was awake, its small face pressed into Clara's shoulder, its eyes wide with a child's innocent fear. Clara's heart pounded against her ribs, a frantic drum. Her breath hitched in her throat. She could feel the cold sweat on her palms. Despite the frigid air, she looked into Chief Bear Claw's eyes. There was no warmth there, only a profound, almost ancient sorrow and a fierce protective anger. He was searching, assessing. 100 pairs of eyes, all fixed on me. They were silent, but their silence was louder than any shout. It spoke of power, of loss, of a judgment that was about to fall. I was just one woman, standing on a patch of frozen earth, holding a child that belonged to them. The chief slowly raised a hand. The warriors remained still, like statues carved from ice. He spoke, his voice deep and resonant, in Comanche. Clara didn't understand the words, but the tone was clear. A demand. Clara took a shaky breath. She knew what he wanted. She knew what they all wanted. She stepped forward, just one small step, exposing herself more fully. She lifted little Star slightly, revealing the baby's face to the chief. Clara, voice trembling, but clear. I found her in the blizzard, near the cottonwoods. She was dying. She pointed vaguely towards the tree line. Her words hung in the cold air, stark and simple. Chief Bear Claw's eyes shifted from Clara's face to the baby's. His eyes lingered on the small, beaded necklace around little Star's neck, the one Clara had found with the baby. A flicker, almost imperceptible, crossed his face. Recognition, pain. He dismounted, his movements fluid and deliberate, never breaking eye contact with Clara. He was a formidable presence on the ground, radiating quiet power. He took a few slow steps towards her. Clara stood her ground, her arms tightening around the baby. She was terrified, but a strange, fierce resolve had settled over her. She would not give up this child easily. Not after saving its life. The chief stopped a few paces from her. His eyes, dark and ancient, bore into hers. He saw the fear, yes, but also something else. Something he hadn't expected. Care. Protection. He extended a hand slowly towards the baby. Clara flinched, instinctively pulling back. It was the moment of truth. The moment I would either lose everything or gain something I couldn't yet comprehend. His hand reaching out was both a threat and a question. Chief Bear Claw's hand hovered in the air between them. Clara's breath was held captive in her chest. Little Star, sensing the tension, let out a small, fretful cry. The chief's gaze softened almost imperceptibly as he heard the baby's cry. His eyes returned to Clara's, a silent plea for understanding. Chief Bear Claw, in broken English, slow, deliberate. My granddaughter, where did you find her? Clara's eyes widened. He spoke English. A sliver of hope, tiny but potent, pierced her terror. Clara, voice steadier now, desperate to convey the truth. By the old cottonwood trees, near the creek bed, the blizzard. It was so fierce. She was wrapped in that hide, almost buried in the snow. And this. Clara gently took the beaded necklace from Little Star's neck and held it out to him, Chief Bear Claw's eyes fixed on the necklace. His hand, which had been reaching for the baby, now trembled slightly as he took the small, intricate piece. He traced the beads with his thumb, his gaze distant, clouded with memory. Chief Bear Claw, whispering, almost to himself, my daughter, Morning Star, she made this for her child. He looked up at Clara, his eyes filled with a raw, profound grief. Chief Bear Claw, we were ambushed by the blue coats. We scattered. Morning Star, she was with her husband. They were separated from us. We searched for days, but the snow, it covered everything. We thought they were gone, both of them. Clara's heart ached. The pain in his voice was universal, transcending language and culture. She saw not a savage, but a grandfather, a father, grieving. The hatred Thomas had spoken of, the fear I had carried, it began to crumble. In that moment, standing before 100 warriors, I saw only a man, broken by loss. Just as I had been. Clara, there was blood on the hide. I think they must have been attacked. She was so cold. I thought she wouldn't make it. Chief Bear Claw looked at the baby again, then back at Clara. He saw the genuine concern in her eyes, the exhaustion etched on her face, the way she held his granddaughter with such tenderness. He saw the absence of malice, the presence of care. Extended his hand again, this time not in demand, but in a gesture of profound gratitude. He gently touched Little Star's cheek, his fingers surprisingly soft. The baby stirred, then reached a tiny hand and grasped his finger. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the chief's lips. It was a smile of immense relief, of a miracle. Found in the most unlikely of places. Chief Bear Claw, you saved her. You, a white woman. You saved my blood. He looked around at his warriors who had been watching the exchange in stunned silence. He spoke to them in Comanche, his voice low and firm. Clara didn't understand the words, but she sensed the shift in the atmosphere. The tension began to dissipate, replaced by a cautious curiosity. The truth was a fragile thing, but it had cut through the fear, through the old hatreds. It was a bridge, built of shared sorrow and an unexpected act of kindness. The small cabin, usually a sanctuary of silence, was now filled with a quiet, respectful presence. Chief Bear Claw sat on a stool by the fire, Little Star cradled in his arms. He hummed a low, resonant tune, a Comanche lullaby, his ancient eyes fixed on the baby's face. Around him, a few other warriors, elders, and trusted guards stood or sat quietly, observing. The rest of the 100 warriors remained outside, maintaining a respectful distance. Their horses tethered. Clara moved about, preparing coffee and stew. Her hands were still a little shaky, but the terror had receded, replaced by a profound sense of wonder. She offered a steaming mug of coffee to Chief Bear Claw. He took it with a nod of thanks. The air had been thick with suspicion, with the weight of generations of conflict. But the baby, this tiny, innocent life, had become a bridge. A fragile, unexpected connection in a world that had always seemed so Divided. She watched the chief with Little Star. He was clearly the baby's grandfather. His features reflected in the child's. The tenderness in his eyes was unmistakable. One of the older warriors, his face etched with wisdom, approached Clara. He spoke in slow, careful English. "You have a good heart. To save a child of the people. It is a great honor." Clara nodded, her throat tight with emotion. She was just a baby, no different than any other. The elder warrior looked at her, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. Perhaps, but many would not see it so. Many would leave her to the snow. Clara remembered her own internal struggle, the fear and prejudice she had to overcome. She had chosen compassion. She offered bowls of hot stew. The warriors accepted them with quiet dignity, eating slowly, their eyes still observing her, but now with a different kind of gaze, not hostile, but assessing, perhaps even grateful. Chief Bear Claw looked up from Little Star, his gaze meeting. "Clara's, you have given her life. We will not forget this." It wasn't a threat, but a promise. A promise of a debt owed, a bond forged in that small cabin. Surrounded by men who had been taught to be my enemies, a new kind of understanding was taking root. It was a fragile thing, easily broken, but it was there. A rare, unexpected alliance. They spoke little, mostly in gestures and shared glances. The fire crackled, casting long shadows. Outside, the prairie wind whispered, but it no longer sounded so lonely. The presence of the warriors, once terrifying, now felt like a strange, protective embrace. Clara found herself sharing details of her life, the loneliness after Thomas, the struggle to survive. The chief listened, his face impassive, but his eyes conveyed a deep empathy. He spoke of his daughter Morning Star and her brave spirit, the shared humanity, the common thread of grief and survival, bound them in a way that words could not. The first light of dawn painted the eastern sky in hues of rose and gold, casting long purple shadows across the pristine snow. The air was still and cold, crisp with the promise of a new day. 100 Comanche warriors were mounted again, their forms silhouetted against the rising sun. Chief Bear Claw held Little Star, wrapped warmly in a buffalo hide. Against his chest. Clara stood before her cabin, watching them. The fear was entirely gone, replaced by a profound sense of peace and a quiet sadness at their departure. Chief Bear Claw rode forward, stopping a few feet from her. He looked at Clara, his eyes deep and knowing. "You have a good spirit, Clara Bell. Your heart is strong." He extended Little Star towards her, not to give her back, but for one last touch. Clara gently stroked the baby's cheek. Little Star's tiny hand reached out, grasping Clara's finger one last time. "Clara, she is a blessing. Take care of her, Chief Bear Claw. She will know of your kindness, always." He paused, then reached into a small pouch at his side. He pulled out a small, intricately carved wooden bird, smooth and warm from his hand. He pressed it into Clara's palm. "Chief Bear Claw, a messenger. If you are ever in need, send word. We will come." Clara clutched the bird, her fingers closing around the smooth wood. It was a symbol, a promise, a connection. He nodded, a gesture of profound respect. Then he turned his horse. With a silent command, the 100 warriors turned as one. They rode away, a dark flowing river across the white prairie, disappearing into the vastness of the horizon as quickly and silently as they came. Clara watched until they were no more than specks, then finally nothing at all. The prairie was silent once more. She was alone again. But not truly. Clara sat by the fire, the wooden bird clutched in her hand. The cabin was quiet, the lingering scent of wood smoke and the faint, sweet smell of the baby still present. The silence was back, but it was a different kind of silence now. Not empty, but full. Full of the memory of a tiny life, of a shared moment of humanity, of a promise whispered on the wind. She looked at Thomas's photograph. His eyes, once so firm in their convictions, now seemed to hold a question. She smiled. Faintly, Thomas had taught me to survive the prairie. But Little Star and her people, they had taught me how to live in it. Not just against it, but with it. With its harshness, yes, but also with its unexpected moments of grace. She placed the wooden bird on the mantel, beside Thomas's photograph. A new kind of fire burned within her. Not the fire of fear or the fire of grief, but a quiet, steady warmth. A fire of connection, of belonging. The vast, unforgiving prairie still stretched outside her door, but now, somewhere out there, there was a bond. A fragile, precious trust. And a small, beautiful life that she had helped to save. Clara looked out the window at the endless white. The world still held its dangers, its sorrows. But it also held the promise of something new. Something stronger than blood, stronger than prejudice, forged in the heart of a blizzard.